Eden Brukman is here sort of on loan to us from the building world, the world of building materials. She's currently principal of Concenter Solutions. Did I say it right? Concenter? Which was, and she has worked since the mid-90s on socially and environmentally responsible solutions for human habitat in general. So she's been in the building space for a long time. And the reason she's here to talk with us is because of her experience working on, she was the first technical director of the Health Product Declaration Collaborative. And that was a collaboration among some NGOs, she'll tell you more about it, and industry looking at how to make hazard information communicable throughout the supply chain of building materials. So it's a supply chain that is complex, not unlike the supply chains we've been talking about today. And so I thought her experience working with those players and with the complexity of that supply chain and developing a method for communicating hazard information would be very revealing for this discussion. So she's also contributed to the development of other programs such as Declare, the Pharos Project, and Eco Districts. And so I think she has a lot to say about sort of what's common among the hazard communication needs in many industries and what's unique to particular industries. So thank you, Eden.
It's great to be with you all today. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Health Product Declaration, which is, as Meg mentioned, a format for, thank you, for content inventory and for hazard screening that was created within the building industry, and tell you a little bit about our trajectory towards success. So I'm going to focus mostly on process, and I'll also show you a portion of the HPD. So speaking as, I'm a licensed architect, and in this case, architects are the consumer, and as are the building contractors and other designers in the industry. And typically what we've seen with a lot of the building industry is, there's a lot of things to consider, just like with any other sector. The top three that always filter to the top are aesthetics, function, and cost. And we tend to see, in different areas, some people might care more about embodied water or embodied energy or the local economy, but those three tend to filter up. Health, however, is kind of newer to the minds of mainstream green building movement. However, it does have a history. So I wanted to give you some context before we jumped into the HPD specifically. In the mid-90s, there was the Green Spec, which was a program initiated by a group called Building Green, which was a product guide with thousands of products, and it also included reviews from an environmental perspective on which ones were better than others. US GBC, the US Green Building Council, created the LEED rating system, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, a couple years later. This contained metrics in materials and resources, as well as indoor environmental quality. In 1999, CalSpec 1350 was a milestone for designers in that it gave emissions testing methods for VOCs, and it also expanded coverage on health-based exposure limits. And that's used not just in California, it's become a national reference. ASHE, or the American Society of Healthcare Engineers, in 2002, they had a green building committee who put out a statement that was very focused on health concerns. Now, they looked at it from different impact areas, so from sites or energy, water, materials, and indoor quality. But one of the things that was particularly important about this as a milestone is that they stressed the precautionary approach. In 2004, the Green Guide for Healthcare pilot program was launched. And this was really the first quantifiable sustainable design toolkit that was published for healthcare projects. It brought in specific health metrics that were not yet being used in other programs. And it also covered all design and construction phases. So we had yet another way to start thinking about design, construction, and health. In 2005, Cradle to Cradle Certified was released, and this is a program for certifying products. Their stated goal is safe ingredients perpetually cycled. they had 5 quality areas that they looked at, the usual suspects, but then they also had filters for social fairness. They're starting to see additional layers of health coming into consideration. In 2006, we launched the Living Building Challenge, and the Living Building Challenge had a number of imperatives, just 20 imperatives in it. It included a materials pedal. Within that, there was a red list, and the red list was not so much about what ingredients to keep out, what chemical substances to keep out of products, as much as how to have constructive communications about how to shift to safer alternatives. And also, Pharaoh's project was launched at the same time, and this was a visual way of showing all of the different hidden trade-offs that otherwise go unseen. And so it had the windrows and layout where you can see social and environmental and health impacts, and then make educated choices. In 2007, the U.S. Green Building Council did a report on the technical basis for PVC-related LEED credit. And the reason that this was a milestone for the community was that it started to talk about how should risks be reconciled along, to the mainstream, and it divided the green building movement, but it also started to bring up really good questions, like should we talk about eliminating negative materials, or should we focus on rewarding preferential materials instead? How do we frame these questions? Should we target the material, or should we target the impact? So again, it kind of expanded the conversation. In 2009, we saw green screen come in, and then also we saw architecture firms like Perkins and Will put together their own precautionary lists, and also putting out resources related to that, and research as well. So that then, all those things happened before the Health Product Declaration came about in 2011. And that's when we started a pilot process. Now, the pilot process was organized by Healthy Building Network, actually. Tom Lent's in the audience. And he was really the founder of this movement for the Health Product Declaration. And he brought together 50 leaders from the green building movement. We had a 2-day meeting where we talked about what should this contain. And once we had a very rough idea of some of the information we thought was important, we then put a call out to manufacturers to participate in helping us develop what would become version 1.0. We thought we were going to get maybe a half a dozen, and we were very pleased when we had maxed out at 30 participating manufacturers in the process. The manufacturers, as you can see, they are from all across different types of building materials. But they're also, some are small, some are small and domestic, some are large multinationals. And so we had a really good starting to get a good understanding of where limitations were with respect to content inventory. We asked them, as they participated in the pilot, a few questions to reflect to help us better create the HPD, or help it evolve. Their top 3 reasons for engaging in cross-sector efforts to account for chemicals of concern, probably not surprising. Number 1, corporate responsibility. Number 2, to promote transparency. And number 3, to have a market advantage. Their biggest difficulties in compiling information for disclosure are also going to be similar across sectors. The extensive data required was the top. There were several that came in as a next tier of importance: supplier resistance, lack of information, and lack of time. The next was internal resistance, and the fourth was there are already too many standards in this space. Now, in the puzzle piece slide that I showed you before, you can imagine that with each one of those things that became a priority to someone, there's at least 1, if not 50 or more, standards that help quantify what's good or what's bad in that space. So there's quite a few standards out there for building industry-related products. We also asked them what roles or skills that they feel are necessary in order to complete a health product declaration. And we got answers across the board. You can see pretty much every department is represented here. In some cases, in the smaller shops, that's one person doing all of these jobs. But in other cases, when you're dealing with multiple levels of bureaucracy, this can start to become very difficult. And certainly we started to have a lot more compassion for when we started to ask that question, what we thought was a simple question of what is in your product. And then we asked them what they enjoyed most about participating in standard creation. One person said that having a voice in the process and having an opportunity to learn more about what a segment of the market wants. Another said gaining a better understanding of the contents of our products, the manufacturing process, and potential hazard impacts. A third, helping make transparency an industry norm by facilitating this often difficult transition for manufacturers. And the fourth, learning that we are actually pretty close to being able to launch a new product offering. And in this case, they weren't talking about a new product, but just the way they could market the product because they learned about what the product did and did not contain. So it actually gave them a new place for marketing and public relations. So the Health Product Declaration, it's intended to be a consistent language for product content reporting. It's a transparent and unbiased framework for manufacturers to report material health information and an essential resource for designers. It's trying to fill a space that is kind of balancing with safety data sheets, which are really more focused around manufacturing. The HPD focuses on the use phase and also dabbles a little bit in installation because we did give a space for accessory materials, because sometimes when you have a great product, it requires a not so great product for installation or maintenance or ongoing use. So this is one snapshot of a portion of the HPD, and I'm going to break it down, so don't worry. This is just section 2. It's kind of the meat of the HPD in that it shows how we divided out the product inventory. We first divided everything out by its material, the homogeneous materials, and then the chemical substances that fit within them. So the prompts for materials were the name. And now here we understand that there is confidential business information. So you can give the specific name of the material, you could give a generic name, or you can mark it as undisclosed. The idea here is that we could still have good and useful information to make choices without knowing proprietary names. The percent of the product by weight, you can see there's also a nice range in there. This is intended to meet manufacturers where they are. The HPD, now a homogeneous material like the fabric on the chair, could actually, in other cases, be its own product. So they can in some cases, those have their own HPD. So if they do, there is a space for that. The inventory threshold. Do they know the content inventory to 100 parts per million, 1,000 parts per million, or more akin to the MSDS? So, or some other threshold. This, again, lets the manufacturer start where they are and then move towards better increments of knowledge. For residuals and impurities, we asked, is this something that's even considered in your content inventory or not? And then the notes give opportunity to explain if they are considered and included in the inventory. What was your methodology? What was your process? What were your issues around if you put unknown or undisclosed? What is your issues around non-disclosure? And things like that. Now, for the substance name, this is where we get kind of more down the rabbit hole here. There's the substances that are known and then the substances that are impurities. They both have the same prompts. The name, which includes the specific, generic, unknown, or undisclosed, and the CAS number or other identifier. The percentage in the material now by weight. And you'll see that I also included alternate here. So including in if the HPD, and if the product had multiple chemical substances that could be used interchangeably, they have the opportunity to put both, include the one that's more often used, and then include the secondary one and list it as an alternate instead of putting the percentage. Showing its green screen benchmark or list translator. Recycled content was something that we included as a prompt, not because we were trying to honor recycled content so much of putting it on a pedestal, but rather to let people know that there could be batch contaminants that may end up raising a different flag. Is it a nanomaterial? Yes, no, or unknown. The role that it plays, and I was really excited to hear this morning that there is a new database of up to 200 roles that maybe the HPD could adopt, because again, standardization is what we're looking for here. Hazards and the agencies with warnings. Now, this is where 17 hazard endpoints are screened against for each chemical substance. And then the agency, 32 different agencies are included in the list, is noted adjacent to it. So you can say that it's an endocrine disruptor by these 5 agencies, or it's persistent bioaccumulative toxin because of these different agencies. And it's not just domestic, it's international. And then we have a space for notes. And this is where, even though the HPD is designed as a hazard assessment, it's also including information here you can put in the notes, information about risk assessments. You can say that, yes, it has this hazard, but it's required by code. And right now, there's just alternatives are still in R&D. So it gives both the role and the notes give manufacturers a way of explaining, or not necessarily, I don't want to say the word justify, but really kind of explaining why something needs to be in the product, instead of it always being kind of a blame game into kind of a negative situation. I wanted to call out this highlight here where some content has been characterized, screened by one or more suppliers. The HPD is built using an online platform. And so if a supplier, say of that fabric, had created an HPD, the manufacturer could actually draw in that information. It transfers accountability to the people who are actually responsible for making the product. We also realized that it's not going to be straightforward. So we had a series of sections on special conditions where a straight-up answer based on the prompt suggestions for each of those wouldn't apply. So these are, I'm not going to get into them, but there's a whole slew of, but what happens when? The way that we originally designed the construction of an HPD was that we created a manufacturer's advisory panel and a technical committee, and then they were laced together through a series of work groups. So the manufacturers had a safe space for them to talk and convene on these different issues, and then the technical committee had its space to talk about standards in the science. They have since been melded under one umbrella, but I really did appreciate this model because of the safety that it gave the manufacturers and the additional benefit that it gave the manufacturers. Within the first year of creating the HPD, there were more than 100 manufacturers represented in the advisory panel. I think the biggest key of the success of the HPD in the early days of it was this, advocacy letters from architecture firms and designers and building contractors and the like. They went through their libraries, which hold potentially tens of thousands of materials, and they sent letters to their manufacturers saying, we want transparency, and if in 2 years you don't have transparency, we will not specify you. Some gave shorter time frames, some were more explicit, but that was the gist of it, and some actually required health product declarations. They also did what is called the lunch and learn, the reverse lunch and learn, where they did transparency forums. This is an example of 6 architecture firms in Texas doing a reverse lunch and learn for 100 manufacturers to explain to them why transparency and disclosure and understanding product content was so critical to their specification needs. Now, we recognize that this is an iterative process, and the consumer in this case we really saw as the signal. Once it goes from the signal, then it passes through, the manufacturer can take this as far as they'd like to go, starting with the product content inventory, all the way to the end of the line with product exposure and assessment. You can see like the return on the bottom, as it returns back to the consumer, it could happen at any phase via libraries or declarations, labels, and certifications. And that then changes what the signal is. On the top, at each point, it gives the opportunity to return back to shift the knowledge process of the manufacturer and allow for innovation. And what we saw was, in many cases, manufacturers were actually taking their preliminary HPD back to R&D and saying, I'm getting 15 hazard endpoints triggered here. What can you do about it? And there was reformulation happening before they've actually issued their final HPD, which I'd argue is the whole point of having this format available. And I guess I'll just end with what I think is really the theme of today, which is a quote from one of my my heroes, Buckminster Fuller, that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Thank you.